welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a highly detailed, honestly fascinating esoteric vision of the afterlife. We're going to map out the exact journey of the soul as it's presented in Ryuho Okawa's work. So, we'll impartially explore exactly how this source maps out life after death. Not to take sides, but just to understand the really intricate spiritual mechanics it presents.
Let me kick things off with a question. Where does your soul actually go when your physical body falls asleep? Well, according to the text, sleep isn't just this physical resting state where your brain recharges. No, it's actually a nightly test run for the afterlife. The source claims that during REM sleep, your soul literally leaves your physical body to travel. Our source material for this is Ryuho Okawa's A Walk in the Spirit World, and it reads almost like a travel guide. Today, we're specifically looking at Chapter 2, exploring the author's really unique categorization of the spirit world, starting with that nightly journey we all supposedly take. Okay, so the text introduces this concept called the dream world, or Mugenko. Think of it as an entry-level spiritual dimension. When your physical eyes are darting around during REM sleep, your soul is apparently visiting this exact realm. But here's the catch. Because people usually don't realize they've left their bodies, the text describes them wandering around this spiritual plane almost like sleepwalkers. They're just kind of hovering near the entrance of the fourth dimension, existing totally outside of earthly time and space.
And speaking of time works completely differently over there. To put it into perspective, the source claims that just 10 to 30 minutes of REM sleep here on Earth can feel like days, literally days, of rich, extensive spiritual experiences in the dream world. You could feel like you've been on a massive journey, met new people, lived for days, and meanwhile, the earthly clock has barely ticked forward.
Right. So if sleep is just a temporary nightly excursion, the big question is, what happens when the soul leaves permanently? This is where the text shifts gears from the daily routine of sleep to the high-stakes transition of physical death. And according to this, your earthly beliefs completely dictate your final destination. The source makes a crucial distinction here. On one side, you have physical death. That's just the straightforward moment the earthly body permanently stops functioning. But on the other side, consider what it calls the materialist's fate. According to the text, strict materialists, people who vehemently deny the existence of a soul or an afterlife, they run into a very specific problem. Because they absolutely refuse to recognize the spirit world, their consciousness essentially just shuts down upon arrival. They believe death is a blank void, so a blank void is exactly what they get. The text paints a really vivid picture of this state, noting they exist in a state of unconsciousness, like being inside a cocoon, unable to move for decades or centuries. It's wild imagery, right? Souls lying completely dormant in these dark, cave-like spaces. They're like silkworms wrapped up in a cocoon of their own rigid disbelief, totally paralyzed just because their mind firmly insists that life has ended.
Moving on from that, the text introduces another fascinating mechanical rule of the afterlife, and that is spiritual gravity. It operates exactly how it sounds. Just as physical gravity roots us to the earth, spiritual gravity acts as a literal weight pulling souls downward into darker realms, basically what the text calls hell. But the weight isn't physical at all. It's entirely mental. It's made up of heavy, selfish, or violent thoughts. So if a soul harbors deep attachments to the earthly world or lacks spiritual awareness, they're naturally pulled down by their own negative mindset.
So what does hell actually look like under this gravity? Well, it's not some physical torture chamber with fire and brimstone. Instead, it operates as a relentless psychological loop. For instance, if someone committed violent acts in life, step 1, they endlessly inflict pain on a phantom victim in the afterlife. But because spirits don't have physical bodies, step 2, the victim just resurrects. Which leads right into step 3, the violence cycle repeats endlessly. It is a localized nightmare created entirely by the soul's own past actions and evil thoughts.
And for those who fall even further, the source outlines the deepest parts of hell. It's described as a place of absolute isolation and pitch-black darkness. The text vividly likens the atmosphere to wading through thick, heavy sludge, and sometimes they're plagued by illusions of monsters conjured right out of their own minds. Honestly, what's truly terrifying about Okawa's description here isn't the monsters, it's the profound loneliness. At the very bottom, souls don't even interact with each other. They're completely isolated, trapped in a dark void with only their extreme earthly attachments for company, at least until they finally realize their mistakes.
But here is where the text introduces a really surprising and honestly pretty hopeful twist. Education does not end at death. The author explains that both heaven and hell actually have functioning schools. Yeah, it turns out crossing over to the spirit world doesn't mean you automatically know everything. You still have to be taught how things work.
So what exactly are they teaching? Well, the afterlife curriculum is surprisingly extensive. Spirits undergo re-education to correct their earthly mindsets, especially those who are being guided out of hell. There's also training for what they call angel reserves, which is essentially teaching advanced spirits how to guide others. They learn the fundamental laws of the spirit world and, perhaps most intriguingly, they engage in something called creation training.
And the setting for these spiritual classes is fascinating. Nostalgic earthly campuses. The text explains that when old wooden school buildings are demolished here on Earth, their spiritual forms often reappear in the spirit world. Because so many people hold fond memories of these schools, that collective thought energy actually sustains the buildings in the afterlife. It makes them these perfect, comforting environments for newly arrived souls to learn in.
Let's actually look at a specific lesson from that creation training I mentioned. Imagine sitting in one of those spirit classrooms and the teacher gives you a prompt. They say, manifest a single red tulip right in front of your eyes using only your thoughts. The teacher, of course, easily conjures a perfect tulip in an instant. This whole exercise is designed to prove a core law to the students. The spirit world is entirely responsive to thought. But, as you might guess, newly arrived students usually fail spectacularly at first. Their results? Bent and twisted shapes, withered and drooping petals, or just completely wrong colors altogether. The author uses this to brilliantly illustrate just how difficult it is to focus raw spiritual energy. It proves that simply having a passing thought isn't enough. You really have to learn to deeply concentrate and master your mind, to shape your reality over there. And that brings us to the core philosophy tying this whole narrative arc together. In Okawa's vision of the afterlife, thought is the ultimate reality. Your mind is literally the ultimate architect. Whether it's creating a perfectly formed red tulip in a spiritual classroom, building a dark, sludge-filled psychological loop in hell, or sustaining the comforting walls of a nostalgic school building, your thoughts literally construct the environment around you. Which leaves us with a final, very provocative question to ponder. Based on everything we've explored in this text today, if your current, everyday thoughts instantly materialized around you, what kind of world would you be living in right now? Would it be a vibrant classroom? Or a dark cocoon? It's a fascinating concept that takes this highly detailed, esoteric text and connects it directly to the mindset you hold every single day. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring